I started a new high school in my junior year as an army brat used to constant change. Unlike many kids with my upbringing, I actually loved moving around and making temporary friends. My new school felt no different at first, though I choose to keep its name a secret for safety. I spent most of my free time in the library, engrossed in my writing and oblivious to the world. That is likely why I didn't notice exactly when Andrew started hanging out nearby. Andrew was a science whiz on the spectrum who struggled to communicate with his peers. He was hard of hearing and spoke with an awkward voice that made others treat him as special. Despite his social struggles, the school's jocks looked out for him like a gentle giant. Soon I started seeing Andrew everywhere, watching me from corners and open hallways. When he followed me home one afternoon, I knew I couldn't ignore his behavior any longer. His gaze didn't feel lustful, but rather fascinated, as if he were studying me. I decided to stalk my own stalker to understand what his motive really was. My friends and I concluded that he wasn't just watching me, but trying to stay near me. Then the real terror began when I spotted movement in my yard late at night. The motion detector lights would constantly trigger, revealing a dark figure lurking in the shadows. I found scrapings on my car door that looked like someone had tried to force the lock. A note was slipped into my locker describing disgusting, violent acts in beautiful cursive handwriting. I knew Andrew couldn't have written it, as his handwriting was messy and childlike. Andrew went away for a few days to a clinic, and I expected the stalking to stop. Instead, I found another note in my locker, this time smeared with real blood. That Friday night, a black-clad figure began spraying my house with a hose and pulling up plants. I called the police, but the intruder didn't leave until he heard the distant sirens. I was more lost than ever, wondering if Andrew and this stranger were working together. Walking home on a warm day, I saw Andrew ducking behind hedges, following me again. Fed up with the fear, I turned around to finally confront him. Suddenly, Andrew began charging at me, 7 feet of muscle barreling forward at full speed. At the last second, he veered right and dived into an overgrown hedge with a scream. He emerged with the black-clad figure in his grasp, slamming him to the ground. Andrew began shaking the man violently, bouncing his head off the turf in a rage. The man looked at me and launched into a tirade of disgusting slurs. A friend ran up and identified the man as the school's janitor. It turned out the janitor had been a soldier, my father arrested years ago for assault. He had recognized me in town and decided to terrorize me as revenge against my father. Andrew had sensed a dark aura from the man and felt a voice tell him to protect me. The janitor had even threatened Andrew to stop him from watching over me, but Andrew refused. I did my best to befriend Andrew after that, though he remained quiet and distant. We eventually moved away, but I still keep in touch with him through email. We play chess online, and he kicks my butt every single time we play. I am happy to lose every game to the man who truly saved my life. Even now, I think of him as my silent guardian from those dark high school days. While some students find protection in shadows, others find their nightmares in the brightest classrooms. Mr. Miller was a young, enthusiastic world history teacher who had just started his second year at the high school. He was known for his sharp suits and an engaging way of explaining the rise and fall of empires. Most students respected him, but one particular student, Sarah, seemed to pay a different kind of attention. Sarah was a quiet girl who always sat in the front row, never breaking eye contact during his lectures. It began with innocent questions after class about the French Revolution or the Cold War. Soon, the questions turned into long, rambling emails sent late at night. The emails weren't just about history, they were about Sarah's personal life and her deep admiration for his intellect. Mr. Miller, trying to remain professional, replied with brief, boundary-setting messages. This only seemed to embolden her as she began showing up at his classroom before he even arrived in the morning. He would find her leaning against the lockers, her eyes tracking his every movement as he jingled his keys. She started leaving small gifts on his desk, ranging from expensive coffee to handmade journals. Mr. Miller eventually pulled her aside to explain that these gestures were inappropriate for a student-teacher relationship. Instead of apologizing, Sarah burst into tears and accused him of playing with her feelings. From that day on, her obsession took a darker, more manipulative turn. Mr. Miller began to feel like he was being followed even outside the school grounds. One evening, he spotted a familiar figure standing across the street from his apartment building. It was Sarah, wearing her school jacket and staring up at his window with unblinking eyes. He immediately closed his curtains and locked his door, his heart hammering against his ribs. The next morning, Sarah was in class as if nothing had happened, smiling brightly at him. Mr. Miller decided to report the incident to the school principal, hoping for a swift resolution. However, Sarah's parents were influential in the community, and they dismissed the claims as a misunderstanding. Sarah then turned the tables, telling the guidance counselor that Mr. Miller had been making her feel uncomfortable. She claimed he was the one who was obsessed, citing the emails he had sent to set boundaries. Taken out of context, his professional replies were twisted to look like secret communications. Sarah's behavior became even more erratic as she realized she had the power to destroy his career. She started leaving notes in his coat pockets, detailed accounts of what he did at home the night before. One note described the exact dinner he had eaten and the color of the pajamas he wore. He realized she must have been watching him through a gap in his curtains, or perhaps even from inside his building. The psychological pressure was mounting, and his performance in class began to suffer. Sarah noticed his distress and seemed to feed off it, her presence becoming a constant shadow. One afternoon, Mr. Miller returned to his car to find the tires slashed and Liar keyed into the hood. He knew it was her, but without proof, the police could do very little. The situation escalated further when he received a phone call from an unknown number in the middle of the night. There was only the sound of heavy breathing and a soft voice saying, "I'm almost there." He stayed awake all night, clutching a kitchen knife and watching the front door. The school prom was approaching, and Sarah had already mentioned how she expected him to be there. She had even sent him a photo of a matching tie she had bought for him. Mr. Miller tried to take a leave of absence, but the school administration insisted he finish the semester. On the night before the prom, he found his front door slightly ajar. Stepping inside, he saw that every photo of his family had been replaced with photos of Sarah. Sitting in the center of his living room was Sarah, dressed in her prom gown, holding a pair of scissors. "I knew you'd come home to me," she whispered, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. Mr. Miller backed away, fumbling for his phone to call for help as she stood up slowly. She didn't attack him. Instead, she began to cut her own hair, clump by clump, onto the floor. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance, but the look in her eyes told him this was far from over. As the police burst through the door, Sarah dropped the scissors and screamed, "He's trying to kill me." The echoing sirens outside Mr. Harrison's apartment provided a rhythmic backdrop to the absolute chaos unfolding inside the room. Officers swarmed the small space, their flashlights cutting through the dimness to reveal the silver gleam of the discarded scissors. Sarah's voice rose to a shrill pitch as she continued to scream her false accusations against the man she had been hunting. Mr. Harrison could only stare in silence, his chest heaving as the reality of his ruined reputation began to take hold. Weeks passed after the incident, and the school district placed both the teacher and the student on mandatory leave during the investigation. Rumors spread through the student body like a wildfire, twisting the truth until nobody knew who the real monster was. Despite the restraining order, Sarah remained convinced that she and Mr. Harrison were destined to be together. She spent her days in her room, meticulously planning a way to reclaim her throne at the upcoming senior prom. The night of the prom arrived, and the gymnasium was transformed into a glittering facade of blue and silver decorations. Students arrived in expensive limousines, laughing and posing for photos while trying to forget the scandal that rocked their year. But beneath the music and the laughter, an uninvited guest was watching from the tree line across the parking lot. She wore a dress that looked like a mockery of a prom queen's gown, tattered and stained with dirt from the woods. Inside, the chaperones patrolled the floor, unaware that the security perimeter had already been breached. Sarah slipped through a side door used by the janitorial staff, her movements practiced and silent. She moved through the empty hallways she knew so well, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her goal was the lighting booth overlooking the gym where she could watch the entire proceedings unseen. From her vantage point, she searched the crowd for Mr. Harrison, who had been forced to attend as a condition of his reinstatement. When she finally spotted him standing near the punch bowl, her grip on the railing tightened until her knuckles turned white. He was talking to another female teacher, and the sight of them together sent Sarah into a silent, shaking rage. She reached into her bag and pulled out a heavy bottle of industrial cleaning fluid she had stolen earlier that week. The music reached a crescendo as the principal stepped onto the stage to announce the prom king and queen. Sarah knew this was the moment she had been waiting for to make her grand re-entrance into their lives. Suddenly, the main power to the sound system cut out, plunging the gymnasium into an expectant, terrifying silence. The students began to murmur, their cell phone screens lighting up like 1,000 tiny stars in the darkness. A single spotlight flickered back on, but it wasn't pointed at the stage, it was pointed directly at Sarah in the booth. She was holding a megaphone to her lips, her voice echoing through the hollow space with a distorted metallic ring. "You all lied about us," she screamed, her words bouncing off the rafters like physical blows. Mr. Harrison stepped forward into the light, his hands raised in a futile attempt to calm the girl he once tried to help. "Sarah, please come down. Let's just talk about this away from everyone," he shouted back. She laughed, a sound that was devoid of any joy and filled with the breaking of a human mind. With a sudden movement, she hurled the bottle of cleaning fluid down toward the stage, where it shattered in a spray of toxic glass. The crowd erupted into a stampede, the scent of chemicals filling the air and causing students to gag and choke. Sarah climbed over the railing, her tattered dress fluttering as she prepared to jump into the center of the chaos. Before she could leap, 2 campus security guards grabbed her from behind, pinning her against the cold metal equipment. She fought them with a strength born of pure delusion, scratching and biting at anyone who tried to separate her from her destiny. As they dragged her away, a crumpled notebook fell from her bag, its pages filled with thousands of repetitions of Mr. Harrison's name. Doctors later diagnosed her with a severe form of erotomania, a condition where the patient believes a person of higher status is in love with them. Mr. Harrison eventually left the teaching profession, unable to step into a classroom without seeing Sarah's face in the back row. The school moved on, but the memory of that night lingered in the gym like a stain that could never be fully scrubbed away. Just as the case seemed closed, the narrator received a package in the mail containing a photo of their own house, taken from the perspective of their best friend's bedroom window. The glossy photograph felt like a lead weight in my trembling hands. I looked out my window toward the house across the street, wondering who was truly watching. By the time the next school semester began, I tried to convince myself it was just a sick prank. That was the week I first met Alex, a boy who stood out even in a crowd of outcasts. He wore heavy black eyeliner and silver pentagram rings that clinked against his skateboard. Being a skater myself, I struck up a conversation about his deck's custom grip tape. Alex claimed he wasn't just into the aesthetic, but was a practicing member of a local coven. His voice had a strange rhythmic cadence that made every sentence sound like an incantation. We started hanging out after school at the local concrete park. He was talented on the board, but he often stopped mid-trick to stare off into space. One afternoon, my twin sister Maya came to pick me up in our shared car. The moment Alex saw her, his entire demeanor shifted from aloof to hyper-focused. He didn't say a word, but his gaze followed her every movement with unsettling precision. Maya waved back at us, oblivious to the predatory weight of his stare. "Your sister has a very powerful aura," Alex whispered without looking at me. I laughed it off, thinking it was just his usual occult roleplay acting up. Over the next few weeks, Alex began asking increasingly specific questions about Maya's schedule. He wanted to know which floor her locker was on and what time she finished gymnastics practice. I started to give him vague, incorrect answers to see if he was actually paying attention. He caught my lies instantly, correcting me on the exact minute her last bell rang. That was when I realized he hadn't just been asking me, he had been watching her himself. I warned Maya to stay away from the strange kid in the black hoodie. Maya told me I was being overprotective and that he was probably just lonely. A few days later, I found a small bundle of sage and bird bones tucked into the grill of her car. I confronted Alex behind the gym, demanding he stay away from my family. He didn't fight back, merely laughing with a hollow, dry sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You cannot stop a spiritual bond that was forged in the stars," he whispered through his teeth. I pushed him away and vowed to never let him near our house. That night, I heard a rhythmic tapping coming from the roof above Maya's room. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, scanning the shingles for any sign of an intruder. The roof was empty, but a trail of black salt had been poured in a perfect circle around the perimeter of the house. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the tree line for any flicker of movement. The next morning at school, I found my locker door slightly ajar. Inside, a series of Polaroid photos showed Maya sleeping in her bed, taken from inside her own closet. I realized then that Alex wasn't just a pretender, he was a master of infiltration. I sprinted to the principal's office to report the break-in and the stalking. Without physical proof of him in the photos, the administration said there was little they could do immediately. I decided to take matters into my own hands and follow Alex home after the final bell. He lived in a dilapidated trailer on the edge of the woods, far from the main road. As I peered through his window, I saw his walls covered in hundreds of hidden camera feeds. One of the monitors showed a live view of our own living room where Maya was currently sitting alone. I fumbled for my phone to call her, but the battery was dead. Suddenly, the trailer door creaked open behind me, and Alex's voice whispered, "I knew you'd want to watch the show with me." I froze as Alex's breath hit the back of my neck in that cramped, dark trailer. The smell of stale cigarettes and old paper clung to him like a second skin. He pointed a thin finger toward a stack of monitors glowing with a sickly green light. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop into a cold abyss. One of the screens showed a grainy, high-angle view of my own living room. My sister was sitting on the couch, completely unaware that she was being watched from a mile away. Alex let out a low, wet chuckle that made my skin crawl. I demanded to know how he got a camera into my house without anyone noticing. He just shrugged and said that true art requires total access to the subject. I realized then that my friend was a predator who had been planning this for months. Alex stepped between me and the exit, his posture suddenly rigid and aggressive. He told me that if I left now, the occult spirits wouldn't be happy with me. I shoved him aside with all my strength and sprinted into the night. My lungs burned as I raced toward home, praying the camera wasn't watching me too. When I burst through my front door, the house felt like a foreign, hostile territory. I found my sister in the kitchen and told her she needed to stay in my room for the night. She looked at me like I was losing my mind, but the fear in my eyes silenced her questions. I spent the next 3 hours searching every vent and corner for the hidden lens. I found it tucked inside the eyes of an old teddy bear on the bookshelf. The realization that he had been in our house, touching our things, made me want to scream. I didn't disable it yet, fearing that Alex would see the screen go dark and come for us. Every shadow in the hallway now looked like a person waiting to strike. Our parents were away for the weekend, leaving us completely vulnerable in this glass cage. Around midnight, I heard the crunch of gravel under tires in the driveway. It wasn't my parents' car, it was the rusted-out sedan Alex used to drive. The engine died, and the silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. A tall, dark figure emerged from the driver's side and stood perfectly still. I grabbed my sister and pulled her into the closet, covering her mouth with my hand. We heard the sound of a key turning in the front door lock. I realized he must have stolen my spare key during one of our skate sessions. Soft, rhythmic footsteps began to echo through the downstairs hallway. He began to hum a low, distorted version of a school fight song. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket, but realized I had left it on the kitchen counter. My sister began to tremble violently against me, her tears wetting my arm. The footsteps moved toward the stairs, each creak of the wood sounding like a gunshot. Alex called out my sister's name in a voice that was way too sweet to be sane. I gripped a heavy metal trophy I had found on the closet floor, ready to defend us. He stopped right in front of the bedroom door and went silent for what felt like hours. Suddenly, the sound of a police siren wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Alex hissed in frustration and bolted back down the stairs before I could even breathe. I collapsed to the floor, thinking it was finally over, but then I saw my phone screen on the floor. A new message was on the screen from an unknown number, showing a photo taken from inside our closet. The caption simply read, "You missed the second lens, and I'm still watching you from the walls." The message about the second lens still haunted my thoughts as I sat in the back of Mr. Harrison's chemistry class. I noticed that Mr. Harrison wasn't actually teaching, but was instead staring intently at a small black notebook. My friend Marcus leaned over and whispered that we should find out where the old man went every day after the final bell. It started as a bored joke between teenagers looking for a distraction from the Alex situation. We waited in Marcus's beat-up sedan at the edge of the school parking lot that Friday afternoon. Finally, Mr. Harrison emerged from the side exit, clutching his briefcase like it contained gold. He didn't head toward the suburbs where most of the faculty lived, but instead drove toward the downtown shopping district. He parked 3 blocks away from a high-end electronics store and sat in his car for 10 minutes. We watched from a distance as he donned a heavy beige trench coat despite the warm evening air. Marcus grabbed his phone to record as Harrison entered the store with a strange mechanical stride. We followed him inside, keeping a safe distance behind the aisles of computer monitors. To our utter disbelief, we saw our chemistry teacher slide a high-end tablet under his oversized coat. He didn't look like a criminal, but his hands were shaking violently as he walked toward the exit. The security alarm never went off, suggesting he had found a way to detag the items inside the store. Marcus whispered that we had to see where he was taking the stolen goods. Harrison drove into a dilapidated industrial district on the edge of town. The area was deserted, filled with crumbling brick buildings and flickering street lamps. He entered a small, unmarked warehouse through a side door using a heavy set of keys. We crept up to a high, grime-covered window and climbed onto some discarded wooden pallets to see inside. The interior wasn't a warehouse at all, but a high-tech laboratory filled with rows of stolen computer parts. Mr. Harrison was feverishly connecting the new tablet to a massive, custom-built mainframe. We realized he wasn't just a petty thief, he was building something massive and illegal using the school's chemistry supplies too. Suddenly, Harrison stopped what he was doing and tilted his head as if he heard a noise. We dropped down from the pallets and scrambled back toward the car, our hearts hammering against our ribs. We thought we had escaped unseen until I noticed a small red light blinking on a pole near the car. The next Monday, Mr. Harrison acted as if nothing had happened, but he kept looking at me during the lecture. His usual tired expression had been replaced by a sharp, predatory focus whenever our eyes met. Marcus stopped coming to school that Tuesday, and his parents said he had never arrived home the previous night. I went to the police, but without Marcus's phone, which held the video, I had no proof of what we saw. The officer dismissed my story as a teenage prank gone wrong or a runaway case. I returned home to find my front door unlocked and a strange chemical smell lingering in the air. On my kitchen table sat the small black notebook Harrison had been holding in class. I opened it to find pages of notes about my daily routine, my route to school, and Marcus's address. I realized that by stalking him, we had inadvertently invited a professional into our own lives. A soft thud came from the upstairs hallway, followed by the slow creak of a floorboard. I grabbed a kitchen knife and backed into the corner, staring at the shadows above. "You shouldn't have looked behind the curtain, Leo," a voice whispered from the darkness. It was Harrison, but he wasn't alone. 2 other men in dark suits stepped out from behind him. They weren't just thieves, they were part of something much larger and more dangerous than I could imagine. As they descended the stairs, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Marcus's number that simply said, "Run." The chilling text from Marcus still glowed on my screen as I stood frozen in the school parking lot. I looked toward the auditorium where the final rehearsal for our horror play was supposed to be taking place. Every shadow between the cars seemed to stretch out like reaching hands trying to pull me back. Despite the warning, I knew I had to find my sister before the drama club locked the doors for the night. The heavy steel doors of the theater wing groaned as I pushed them open into the silent hallway. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sawdust and old velvet curtains. I heard a distant muffled laugh coming from the direction of the stage props room. It didn't sound like the usual theater kids practicing their lines for the show. The laughter was sharp and jagged, sounding more like a cruel joke than a script. I crept closer to the stage, seeing the flickering light of the ghost light on the floor. Suddenly, a mannequin dressed in a bloody nurse outfit fell from the rafters. I nearly screamed as it swung back and forth like a pendulum in the dark. Out of the darkness, 3 seniors emerged, clutching a remote control and snickering. They told me they were setting up the ultimate horror prank for the janitor who always kicked them out late. Mr. Henderson was a kind, elderly man who had worked at the school for 30 years. I tried to tell them about the text from Marcus and the feeling that we weren't alone. They just laughed and told me I was being a paranoid freshman who couldn't handle a little atmosphere. We heard the heavy rattle of the janitor's keys echoing from the far end of the corridor. The seniors scrambled into the darkness of the stage wings, pulling me along with them. We watched through the curtain gap as Mr. Henderson entered with his heavy cleaning cart. I felt a pit in my stomach as he hummed a quiet tune, oblivious to the trap above. One of the seniors held a high-powered strobe light ready to trigger it at the perfect moment. I realized they hadn't just set up a mannequin, they had rigged the trap door on the stage floor. Just as Mr. Henderson stepped onto the center stage, the strobe lights began to fire rhythmically. A screeching sound of high-pitched feedback blasted through the auditorium speakers. The janitor stumbled back, clutching his chest in genuine terror as the mannequin dropped right in front of his face. In his confusion, he tripped over his own mop bucket and fell toward the unsecured trapdoor. The sound of the wood splintering as it gave way was louder than the speakers. I watched in slow motion as Mr. Henderson disappeared into the darkness beneath the stage. A sickening thud echoed from the basement level, followed by a silence that felt heavy and permanent. The seniors stopped laughing instantly, their faces turning a ghostly pale in the dim light. One of them dropped the remote and it shattered on the hard floor with a plastic snap. I ran to the edge of the hole and looked down, calling out the janitor's name into the pit. There was no answer, only the sound of a distant dripping pipe somewhere in the bowels of the school. Suddenly, the lights in the entire auditorium flickered and died completely. From the back of the room, near the sound booth, I heard the heavy clicking of boots on the floor. A tall, dark figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hallway lights like a nightmare. The seniors didn't wait to see who it was. They bolted toward the emergency exit, leaving me alone. I stood by the hole in the stage, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silhouette began to move toward the stage, and I realized it wasn't a student or a teacher. As the figure reached the edge of the stage light, I saw it was wearing the same mask we used for the play, but there was real blood dripping from the chin. The bloody mask from the theater incident haunted my dreams for weeks after the school year ended. I decided to pour all that nervous energy into my growing YouTube channel, hoping for a fresh start. My subscriber count was small, mostly just local kids from my high school and a few tech enthusiasts. That was when the user Leo Superfan first appeared in my comment section. His comments weren't about the videos, but about what I was wearing or the background of my room. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a socially awkward kid from my grade. Then I began to notice a specific smell in the hallway whenever I walked to my locker. It was a pungent mix of stale sweat, unwashed hair, and something sweet like rotting fruit. One afternoon, I saw him standing at the end of the corridor, staring directly at me. He was wearing a shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in months, stained with dark blotches. When I looked back a second later, he had vanished into the crowd of students. That night, a new comment appeared. "I liked your blue hoodie today, Leo." I had been wearing a blue hoodie that day, but I hadn't filmed anything in it. I blocked the account immediately and set my social media to private. Graduation came and I thought I had finally escaped the weirdness of high school. I moved 3 hours away to a university in a different city, hoping for anonymity. For the first 2 months, life was peaceful and I felt like a normal student again. Then I found a small, hand-delivered envelope tucked under my dorm room door. Inside was a single printed photo of me sleeping in my bed, taken from the window. The back of the photo was stained with a greasy thumbprint and smelled like that same rotting fruit. I looked out my window, which was on the second floor, realizing someone must have used a ladder. I saw a figure standing in the shadows of the courtyard, perfectly still. I called the campus security, but by the time they arrived, he was gone again. I couldn't sleep, jumping at every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind. I realized that blocking him online hadn't worked because he was physically tracking my location. I decided to bait him into showing himself so I could finally get the police involved with proof. I posted a public update saying I would be studying at the 24-hour campus diner alone. I sat in a booth near the back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. 2 undercover campus officers were seated at the counter pretending to eat. Suddenly, the heavy smell hit me before the door even opened. The fan walked in, his clothes even filthier than before, clutching a stained backpack. He spotted me and a wide, toothy grin spread across his pale face. He sprinted toward my booth, reaching into his bag for something. The officers tackled him to the floor before he could reach me. A large kitchen knife slid across the floor, having fallen from his open bag. He started screaming that we were meant to be together forever in his shrine. Later, police found a literal shrine in his nearby motel room filled with stolen items of mine. He was charged with stalking and attempted assault and committed to a psychiatric facility. I deleted my channel that night, realizing that some prices for fame are simply too high to pay. The halls are finally quiet, and for the first time in years, I am no longer being watched.